And lastly, we'll talk about the Aztecs, the origins of the Aztecs. All right, we'll go more deeper into Aztec society next week. But for this week, let's just talk about the rise of the Aztecs, where they come from, which is also kind of a mystery, and how they established themselves in central Mexico, eventually to become the most one of the most dominant empires there. All right, so when we talk about this origin story of the Aztecs, you got to keep in mind that you can't take it all at face value. Right? One, because yes, it has mythological aspects to it, but another reason why you can't take the story at face value is because the way the Aztecs viewed history and Mesoamerican civilizations in general. They viewed history as a cyclical thing, meaning that history tends to repeat itself every 52 years. Right? Maybe not exactly, but there are certain events that will reoccur every 52 years. Right? That's their historical perspective on how history works. It doesn't just work in a linear aspect, the way that we look at history, right, where it's constantly growing and changing and progressing. That's the way we tend to look at it. But the Aztecs looked at history as more of like a cycle, right? A secular view of how history works. So it works in cycles. Every 52 years, which is the calendar round, you have history and some events in history taking place again and again, repeating themselves every 52 years, right? So we don't know precisely which cycle these events occurred in when we're listening to the Aztec origin story, right? Maybe they occurred, far in the past, maybe not so far in the past. We can't really pinpoint it because they could be referring to a cycle long ago, or they could be referring to a cycle that was a little more recent. We don't know exactly, right? So they don't give the precise date. But we do believe that the migration of the Aztecs most likely took place in the year 1111 CE. Okay, this is most likely where their migration took place into central Mexico, right? This is our estimate. All right, but we can't really take their story at face value because, like I said, it's mythical in some aspects, and the way that they view time is different from the way that we view time. So the dates may not line up with our dates. Okay, it could have been farther in the past, could have been more recent. All right, so let's get to the story. We'll go ahead and tell the Aztec origin story of their migration into central Mexico. So this migration begins in the home of the Aztecs, which is known as Aztlan, right? Aztlan, the land of the white herons. This is where they come from, and they're migrating away from this place, okay? Where is Aztlan located? We don't know. Okay, there's been a number of debates about this on where Aztlan actually is. Some people say maybe it's in the American Southwest, like in the area of like New Mexico or Arizona. Some people say maybe it's in California, maybe it's in northern Mexico. We don't know exactly where Aztlan is. Okay, but it's in the area, of course, where you have Nahuatl-speaking people. That's one thing we do know because the Aztecs are a Nahuatl-speaking people. So the Aztecs begin in their homeland of Aztlan, wherever that was, and they are being accompanied by their god, right? Their tribal god named Huitzilopochtli, okay, who is a hummingbird god at this time. Okay, so they're carrying like this actual statue of Huitzilopochtli with them. You have Aztec priests who are carrying that with them on this migration of theirs. Where are they migrating to? They don't know, right? But we'll see. They do have some signs that they're looking for when they get there, which will let them know where they are to settle down at. Okay. Okay. So the Aztecs are migrating. They're coming from Aztlan. They're carrying their god, their tribal god, with them. And this tribal god, Huitzilopochtli, it's said that their god gives them a new name while they are on this migration journey. So they're known as the Aztecs because they come from Aztlan originally, but their god, Huitzilopochtli, is going to give them a new identity, a new name as they migrate to their new homeland. And that name is the Mexica. Okay, and so this will become the new ethnic identity of the Aztecs. They will be known as the Mexica. And it may sound a little familiar to you, right? Mexica, Mexico. Mexico is basically, that word basically means the land of the Mexica, or the home of the Mexica. Okay, and so maybe you learned something right there you never heard before, right? So Mexico is the home of the Aztecs, or the Mexica. Right. All right. So they got this new identity now. They're still migrating though, right? But they're migrating into the area of central Mexico where you have the civilizations, the civilized city-states. right, that are located there. And this is after the fall of the Toltecs. So remember, we talked about how the Toltec Empire ended, and afterwards a number of Toltecs would migrate to various city-states, and they would influence those city-states and spread their type of civilization. And so basically what the Aztecs are migrating into central Mexico is an area that has a number of different city-states, but there's no one powerful empire in that area. Okay, so things are kind of up for grabs at that point. When the Aztecs first migrate into central Mexico, they will settle down at a place called Culhuacan. And we could take a look at this little map here. Here is Culhuacan right here. All right, and so the Aztecs migrate into central Mexico from Aztlan. They have their god with them, and they settle down for a period of time in Culhuacan. And at that time, Culhuacan is a civilized place. It's a city-state. The Aztecs are kind of seen as, you know, these hunter-gatherer type people, right, or people who are not really civilized, and so they're looked down upon. And their role in Culhuacan is as serfs, meaning that they're tied to the land, they're working the land, they're working as, you know, farmers basically for the lords, for their Culhuacan lords. Okay, so they don't have an esteemed position in society. They're just serfs who are tied to the land. But eventually, after a period of time, the leaders of Culhuacan will give the Mexica a gift. All right? And what is that gift? They're going to actually give them a princess to intermarry so that they could be tied into the royal bloodline at Culhuacan. That's a huge gift, right? That is like a prestigious honor, right? That this Culhuacan princess would be given to the Mexica, these lowly serfs. Right? But something happens that kind of gets the Mexica on the bad side of the people at Culhuacan. So after this princess is given to the Mexica, her father and other leaders of Culhuacan will come to the area where the Mexica live. They want to visit this princess, right, the daughter, and they come there and they are greeted by something that is pretty hideous. Okay, so instead of the king of Culhuacan coming and finding his daughter, he finds an Aztec priest who is conducting a ritual ceremony, and this priest is dressed in the skin of the Culhuacan princess, right? And so this is kind of shocking, right? This is really shocking, right? And so the king comes only to find that his daughter has been killed, and not only has she been killed, but there's an Aztec priest wearing her skin, conducting a ceremony. We'll talk about why they were doing this later next week, right? But there's a reason behind this. There's a certain ceremony why this was done. Okay, and so this, of course, is going to get the Mexica kicked out of Culhuacan, right? They're no longer welcome there. All right, and so they get kicked out, and now they're back on their migration, right? They're trying to find the place where they're going to settle down. And eventually they do. They move into the area of a powerful city-state in central Mexico known as the Tepanecs. Right? And the Tepanecs allow the Mexica to establish themselves on an island in Lake Texcoco, and this will become the place where they settle. This is known as Tenochtitlan. This is going to eventually become the capital of the Mexica Empire, or the Aztec Empire, right? So let's take a look at the map here. Here is Tenochtitlan, and so this is the area in Lake Texcoco where the Aztecs will be allowed to settle down. Right? And this is just some island in the lake. It's not built up. It's not established. The Aztecs pretty much have to develop it themselves. And so this powerful city-state known as the Tepanecs are going to allow the Aztecs to move onto this island. And also, on Tenochtitlan, this is also the place where the Aztecs see the spiritual signs that show them that, yes, this is the place where our migration ends, where we're going to settle. Right? It is said that this symbols that they were looking for was an eagle on a cactus with a snake. Now, whether the snake was in its talons or whether the snake was in its mouth, that's up for debate. I've heard different versions of that story because there are a number of different versions of the migration of the Aztecs. But one way or another, there was a cactus, there was an eagle on it, and there was a snake somewhere around there. Okay, and that's the symbol that representing the sky and the earth. The eagle representing the sky, the snake representing the earth. These two coming together. This is the place where the Aztecs were supposed to settle. This is a sign for them. them, and so that's what they see there on this island, which will become Tenochtitlan as they settle it. Okay. They also settle another nearby island called Tlatelolco around that same time, right? And so now the Aztecs have a place to live. They're not on their migration anymore. And they're working for the Tepanecs, this powerful city-state there in central Mexico. And how are they working for them? Not as serfs, they're working for them as mercenaries, hired warriors, okay? So basically, with the help of the Aztecs, the Tepanecs are expanding during this time and are becoming one of the more powerful city-states in central Mexico, right? Because they're working with the Aztecs. Aztecs are great warriors. So the Tepanecs are they have a decent relationship with the Aztecs. The Aztecs are working for them as mercenaries. And eventually, the Tepanecs will give the Aztecs a gift. And that gift is they're going to make one of the Aztecs a king. All right, the first Aztec king. And how do they make him a king? By letting him intermarry into the royal bloodline of the Tepanecs. Okay, and why the royal bloodline of the Tepanecs? Because, all right, at this time, remember I was saying how the Toltecs, after the fall of Tula, migrated out into central Mexico, and they, became like the dominant force in a number of these city-states at that time? Well, that Toltec royal bloodline, if you are married into that royal bloodline of the Toltecs, that means that you have a right to rule, right? You are legitimate, right? You are seen as a legitimate ruler. And so in a number of these city-states there in central Mexico at this time, a lot of these royal families had claim to that Toltec royal bloodline, and the Tepanecs were one of them. Okay, so the fact that the Tepanecs allowed the Aztecs to marry into that royal bloodline is going to give some legitimacy to the Aztecs. And this is where you get the first Aztec king named Acamapichtli. Okay, so that's why we have Acamapichtli here. He is the first Aztec king, seen as legitimate. Before this, the Aztecs didn't have a king, right? They had tribal chiefs, right? But they didn't have like a king who ruled over all of the Aztecs, right? There was a number of different tribal chiefs for different groups, etc. They didn't have that type of organization. So now the Tepanecs basically are allowing the Aztecs to marry into their royal bloodline, that Toltec bloodline, and now they have their first king, Acamapichtli. All right. So the Aztecs are really starting to establish themselves. They got a place to live. They got a king now. They have ties to the Toltec royal bloodline. And so now you see this shift in the way that the Aztec society is ran, right? It was more of an egalitarian type of society before. Yes, there was leadership, but people were a little bit more equal. But now you're going to start to see a shift there. Now that there's this king, you're going to see the Aztecs becoming more and more stratified. You're going to start to see the class system develop over time. It takes time, but over time you'll see that social hierarchy developing amongst the Aztecs as well. And this is what I'm referring to when I talk about the rule of the pipiltin, right? What is the pipiltin? The pipiltin is the nobility. Okay, and so now you're starting to see this shift in Aztec society where you have a nobility, you have a ruling family, you have a claim to the Toltec royal bloodline, and so this is a sign of civilization. And this is what the Aztecs are learning now that they're in central Mexico. Okay, this is how many of the other city-states are ran. They are ran by the rule of the pipiltin, the upper class, the nobility, the ones with the royal bloodlines. Okay, that's how civilized states are ran in central Mexico. The Aztecs, they don't come from there, right? They're more of like a hunter-gatherer type of people. Maybe they were partially civilized. Right? And so now the Aztecs are learning this new civilized way of life. They're taking on a social hierarchy slowly over time, right? They are having a nobility, etc. All right, so things are starting to change for them. Now, eventually, the Aztecs are going to get into a conflict with their Tepanec overlords, right? The people that they're working for as mercenaries. Okay, this powerful state, the Tepanecs. And this happens later after the rule of Acamapichtli, the first Aztec king. This happens under the rule of an Aztec king named Itzcoatl. All right? Itzcoatl, under his rule, basically, you're going to see the Aztecs turn on the Tepanecs, who they were fighting for originally. And the Aztecs eventually will bring in other allies. There'll be other states who want to ally with the Aztecs. And ultimately, the Aztecs will overcome and defeat the Tepanecs, this powerful state. which they helped to expand, right, as mercenaries. So this is ultimately how the Aztecs will rise to power in central Mexico. They have lowly beginnings. They're kicked out of Culhuacan, right? They work as mercenaries. They live on some deserted island in the middle of a lake where people didn't really want to live at that time, right? But they developed it and they worked hard over time, and eventually they went to war with the Tepanecs and they defeated them, and now they're on the road to establishing their own empire in central Mexico.